Sounds like Europe. Cross-border podcasting.
Hello and welcome to Sounds Like Europe, Cross-Border Podcasting, a project brought to you by WePod. I am your host, Javi Caminero. In this podcast, I like to reflect on the state of the podcast industry in Europe and how a project like WePod can contribute to keep things growing and improving. If you have a look at the Sounds Like Europe feed on any platform, you can see that since January 2024, we have talked about many different aspects of podcasting in Europe. That is audiobooks, branded podcasting, even we have talked about audiences. But this time I want to tell you how the industry we're trying to promote here at WePod is similar to and different from the podcast industry that started it all. That's the American one. To talk about this, I'm joined by Andreea Coscai, producer and podcast marketing manager at American podcast producing company Tink Media. Hi Andreea, how are you?
Hi Javi, I'm good. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Thank you for being here. Andreea, you are from Romania, you live there, but you work for a company in the United States. So please explain to me, how did that come about and what's your story with podcasting?
So I actually was living in the States 5 years ago. I was there for a while and I got into podcasting from one of my mentors who was a sound artist, but also a fan of podcasts. Okay. And one of the first podcasts I listened to was The Heart by Caitlin Prest, which it blew me away completely. And I said, you can do that with sound? And, that's a podcast. At the time in 2018, 2019, Romania wasn't really up to date with it necessarily. So I was really discovering what the medium was as a whole. And I was just very passionate about it because I was interested in radio and storytelling. And so I started working in production at first with different clients. And then I slowly moved into marketing. So now I work with, as you mentioned, Tink Media, which is a podcast marketing and growth company. In between those two worlds that are very interconnected, producing a podcast, creating it, and then also helping other creators grow. So that was kind of my journey. And I came back to Romania 2 years ago. I've been living back home ever since, kind of trying to see what's going on in the Romanian market. And then I said, why not branch out even more and zoom out to what's going on in Europe and kind of make some comparisons.
And what's your job like at Tink Media? What's your role from Romania?
So at Tink Media, I am a marketing manager. Actually, all of us have more or less the same roles. That's kind of the approach and the philosophy of the company. So what we do is we work with creators. So they are independent or they can be a network. It depends on the client. And we help them grow a show. So this can be over the course of a few months or even a long-term campaign of, over a year. And we do this through different approaches. Actually, the approach of the U.S. podcast marketing sphere is really what I'm trying to encourage in Europe as well. Some countries are already doing it, but others are, not looking towards this as much and are more so maybe focused on social media and SEO, which those are great as well. But what we do at Tink is really sustainable and honestly making podcast friends. That's how we call it, making podcast friends for our clients. So that means finding the best fits and the strategic partnerships for them to grow the show and develop their audience. And we do this through cross promos. We do feed swaps. We pitch our clients as guests in other shows. We feature them in newsletters and apps. So it's a accumulation of things, and all of it is making sure that the marketing we do for them is directed at people who are already listening to podcasts and kind of waiting to find the new show to add to their queue, because it's really hard to convert someone who doesn't really have this in their routine into a podcast listener. So that's why we do that.
Just like a matter of coming up with new strategies that can make everything work. Just for those listening, Maybe I should point out that we already did a feed swap with Tink Media.
Yeah.
We published an episode of Feed the Queue a few months ago here on the Sounds Like Europe feed, and they did the same with one of our episodes. You know the industry very well in Europe, as you are living here and you're trying to make some things that you apply on the American market work here. And you know as well, for sure, the American market. So tell me, what are the differences between one and the other in terms of for example, marketing or advertising?
So many differences, so many. And as you know, it really depends country by country in Europe.
Yeah.
That's one of the huge limitations. I mean, there are some countries like Spain or Portugal or even Poland, which I found out recently, that are so highly developed in the podcasting industry. And then other countries like Romania, maybe Slovenia. I've recently spoken to someone from Slovenia, actually, who was kind of sharing about that are, I wouldn't say necessarily catching up, but maybe having their own journey. And in that sense, also, since we're talking about differences, I think Europe and even, the UK within Europe, which is the biggest industry, is always looking towards the States. So what I think is important is that we remember Europe has its own course with the industry, its own journey. And yes, we can compare and we should, learn from each other. But at the same time, it shouldn't be a matter of, the States is there at the top and Europe is like trying to catch up or has a long way to go, because I think it's just different. In terms of marketing, what I've noticed is, these kinds of strategies that we apply are a bit less common in Europe. And again, it really depends country by country. And I think it depends by how much the industry is evolved, really. I've seen that similarly to the US, actually, video podcasts and celebrity podcasts are kind of really at the top. Radio played a huge part in the US and in Europe in making podcasts mainstream. But I think, honestly, that the biggest difference of all, and, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts here as well, is the monetization part and the available resources in podcasting, which cannot compare. When we're talking about the US, the funds that are available there compared to what is in Europe is very different.
Yeah, here in Europe, if you want to succeed as a podcaster, the easiest way is to be part of a bigger network. Maybe a producer that is part of another big enterprise, and I'm talking mainly about the company I work for. Here, Podium Podcast is this huge podcast producing company, but because it's part of Grupo Prisa and Cadena Ser, which is this big Spanish enterprise in terms of mass media. If you want to succeed as an independent podcaster, I think here in Spain and in Europe in general is usually way harder than in the States, where I think they have kind of made their own in terms of funding with funds, and telling them how to produce their content, being part of some of the decisions. That's what they accomplish via Patreon, for example. Patreon isn't that popular here in Spain. There are some successful examples, of course, as there should be, but it's not that used here in Spain. And I feel that in the States, it's something that every independent podcaster at some point will try to make work.
Yes, that's a huge one for sure in the States. I think in Europe, I have seen some podcasters try to use this method as well. Some through Patreon, others through, I don't know, Buy Me a Coffee or anything that's the equivalent in their country. What I've seen works really well, apart from, sponsorships and things like that, which is similar, of course. Is live events. Live events is a huge thing, similarly to the States. that really works. And I've seen that being done in Romania as well. And I wonder actually from that audience, how many people were actually listening to the podcast as well, or maybe just coming to the events. But it's just such a great way to also engage your community and make sure that you create that relationship with them. And then another thing was, grants. That's what I was going to mention. Grants is definitely a, monetization strategy in the States as well. But, I think Europe has so many great resources. An example is, of course, the European Commission and different European organizations that are actually dedicated to supporting storytelling and journalism, because journalism is really driving podcasting in Europe. So that's another way that independent podcasters, or even, what WePod is doing, can sustain themselves. Yeah.
In terms of the podcasting content, as you have just mentioned, how journalism is driving some of the main podcasts here in Europe, do you think there's a big difference between what is working here and what is working there in America?
In terms of the content approach, right?
The approach and the way to tell stories, maybe the formats as well.
Yes. Yeah, I think, apart from the celebrity video podcasts that we're talking about, which are pretty, familiar. Yeah. I mean, I've really noticed that in Europe, journalism is truly a driving force, and there are so many independent media outlets or supported media outlets that are starting podcasts, and they even have independent podcasters kind of hop on and do a partnership with them. So, I mean, I think that's very, very encouraging. There's a space also for independent podcasters talking about different topics that are, less on the journalistic side, like pop culture and other things. And I know those are pretty popular as well. But that is definitely one thing I've noticed, and one thing I really resonate with. I think at the end of the day, storytelling from a personal approach is so important. So I think maybe that's one thing that Europe can kind of, do more of, if we're talking about differences between the States and Europe. So not just having that journalistic side, which is so well done in Europe, and there's so many amazing people doing great work like yourself. But also kind of having more so that storytelling approach from a personal perspective, and kind of, even documentary storytelling.
Yeah, I think that being able to combine that journalism part to adding a personal perspective to a journalism project is what right now maybe differentiates us from the American landscape of podcasting. But I think that comes mainly that in the United States they have been doing this kind of journalism for way longer than us. The biggest podcasting hit in the 2010s was Serial, and it was in 2014. That's more than 10 years ago, and by that time podcasting wasn't even this huge idea here in Europe, or at least here in Spain, in terms of making our own projects, our own documentaries. So I think there's a bit of a difference in when we talk about times and the rhythm that and the pace we can work with. But I think that we're getting there, and we're being able to find that internal speaker in the journalists when we tell a story, and to find different approaches to make our stories work in different ways, not only in a journalistic, traditional radio-based way, which is where we were coming from.
I think. Just to give another example here, because I was recently in a workshop in Bucharest on podcasting, and it was a French audio creator and audio documentarist, Theo Boulanger, and his work is really focused on that. It's documentary podcasting, and it's so different from the kind of journalistic work, but it's also as important. So again, I think it really depends also on the countries, and it seems that France, for example, really has has a based community around that.
I believe that the potential, the target audience of any podcast in the United States is way bigger than the potential audience in, for example, just to keep with that same example, in France, simply because of the language. So talking about numbers, what numbers does a great American podcast aim for?
Oh, well, I mean, it can be up to the millions,
yeah,
you know,
let's keep
thousands, yeah.
Let's keep the Joe Rogans of the world apart from this question. Let's go for a quote unquote normal podcast that can be successful with some conversation and some buzz created out of it.
Well, the most difficult part, and different researchers are looking at this as well, like different case studies, is getting your podcast really from the ground up when you just started, when you launch it, and you have, 20 people listening, 100. The most difficult part is skipping that and like getting to the thousands. Once you have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 listening, the growth potential is much, much bigger. Most podcasts actually that are being launched are under the 1,000. And once you start applying those marketing strategies, you can really get that organic growth, because again, it's actual podcast listeners that are looking for the next show. So I would say, if you have 10,000 listens, that is a great audience number. And even in those few thousands, it has a lot of potential growth. So you can already consider yourself as a successful podcaster, and you can start monetizing. So in terms of also thinking of, what numbers Europeans can aim for, I would say that's the same thing. If you have a few thousand listeners, you can already think of doing these live events. You can already think of, having some subscriptions models, or, the kind of Patreon we were talking about. You can think of sponsors, even looking at different local businesses and getting creative with it.
Yeah, I can only agree with that, because maybe that's not only a matter of numbers, but a matter of being able to create a community. Maybe a podcast with 10,000 listeners has way more engagement and a way more interested audience than a podcast with 50,000 listeners. It can happen. It may not be the norm, but it can absolutely happen. Andrea, at the end of 2024, last year, you started your newsletter. It's called Eurowaves. Please tell me, what is it about? How is it working out for you? I think that it sounds like Europe may have made some appearances here and there. So please explain to us about your newsletter.
Yes. So as I was saying, since I came back to Romania, I was looking at the industry and what's going on and what is the potential, and how I can bring in what I'm learning in the States and what I'm doing in the States to this industry. And then I said, okay, let me zoom out and see what's going on Europe-wise, because honestly, apart from the work you are doing and, maybe Europod, which anyway is a part of WePod, it's really rare that there are newsletters, communities, or podcasters looking at Europe as a whole. And so I started this newsletter, Eurowaves, and it comes out every 2 weeks, and it has interviews with different European podcasters. So this can mean, independent creators. It can mean executive levels. Conversations range from AI, different, storytelling techniques. And, it's just we cover so many topics. And I also include what podcasts I'm listening to that come from Europe or that would be relevant for European creators. I share events coming up because, that's something that I myself, I'm doing. I'm trying to be more present in person as well. It's so important. And that's why I was so grateful for WePod's Podcasting Academy in Milan.
It was great there in Milan. It was a great experience having you there, having everyone involved with podcasting there. It felt like a like a bit of a journalism podcast in summer camp, you know?
Yeah. The energy was great. And
Yeah.
it just, it really gives you a boost of motivation. Okay, let's do it together and make so many connections. So it was really amazing. And then there's also a part of the newsletter that's a mini curation from different countries in Europe. In the native language of whoever is curating, and then now more recently translated to English. So, I mean, it's been going great. There's also a Google group listserv that is kind of attached to the newsletter just for European podcasters and anyone who might be interested in what's going on in this space. And I think it really took off, and it just goes to show that there was really a need for it. People are looking for community. They're looking for connection, for learning from each other. And I'm really happy that this newsletter and the listserv can kind of come in the help of that.
Yeah, I think your newsletter is a great opportunity to connect, to get to know different podcasters from Europe. So I really encourage everyone listening to subscribe to Eurowaves. And before we end the episode, Andrea, I would like to ask you the two classic Sounds Like Europe questions about your listening habits. I would like to know first, what's your favorite podcast right now?
My favorite podcast is I started listening to What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined. And it's just a history of podcasting. It's so good. It's a limited series, I believe. There's still episodes coming out, and it's so important to know, everything that happened in podcasting and how can we keep growing it from here.
And when is your favorite moment to listen to podcasts?
Honestly, any time of the day. Any time of the day. That's something that we're talking about at the Podcasting Academy too. Like podcasts can really integrate in your life so easily. Yeah. So,
that's
when
great,
I wake up,
that's kind of dangerous as well, because
yes.
maybe you can find you listening to too many stories at once, and maybe that can be tricky sometimes. But yeah, I feel what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, then you can just binge one story, But I listen to it, I don't know, in the morning when I get ready for the day, when I'm commuting somewhere, in the evening, just whenever I have a spare moment. And there are just so many stories, and my queue is always full.
As it should be. Andreea Coscai, producer and podcasting manager at Tink Media, thank you for joining me in this episode of Sounds Like Europe. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you so much.
And to everyone listening to this interview, I've been your host, Javi Caminero. Thank you for being there, and I will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Sounds Like Europe. Bye-bye.
Sounds Like Europe, Cross-Border Podcasting is a WePod podcast funded by the Creative Europe programme. Hosted and written by Javi Caminero, sound design by Manu Tomillo, coordinator Alexander Damiano Ricci, executive producer Anna Ribera.